I would like you to know that I am an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur, and what I'm doing right now I consider as entrepreneurial. I started a construction business in Albuquerque in 1974 as a one-person handyman, me, and in 1994 I actually had 1,000 employees, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, pipe fitting. Really, American dream come true, showing up on time, doing what you said you'd do for people, doing a little bit more than what you'd say you'd do for people, and really that was the basis for the business's success. I sold that business in 1999. Nobody lost their job, and that business is doing better than ever. I went and I introduced myself to the Republican Party 2 weeks before I announced my candidacy for governor. And what they said was wow, we like you. We like what you've got to say, but you just need to know that you'll never get elected governor in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat. It's just not possible to come from completely outside of politics and have that happen. Well, it did happen. And why was that? I'd like to think it was what I had to say, which was going to be issues first, politics last, that I was going to run state government like a business, best product, best service, lowest price, that everything was going to be a cost-benefit analysis. What are we spending and what are we getting for the money that we spend? And then, since it wasn't going to be political, put the issues that should be on the front burner, because there just weren't going to be any political consequences to doing that. So I did get known for some things as governor. One was I did veto 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico. I had thousands of line item vetoes, which I took to a new art form. And you need to understand that it's just not about saying no. It's that only 2 of the vetoes were overridden. So it really made a difference. It made a difference when it came to billions of dollars worth of spending in New Mexico. But all of these no's that I registered got played out in the paper. I mean, Johnson vetoes motherhood in New Mexico. And I would have to explain why, you know, motherhood is really important, but does the state of New Mexico need to fund that? And I took that argument on all the time, and since I got reelected, I just think it speaks volumes to the fact that people really do appreciate a good stewardship of tax dollars. I'll tell you also that of those 750 vetoes, 1/3 of those vetoes were vetoes of Republican bills, because Republicans grew government just like Democrats grew government. Of course, Republicans do it in the right way. Legislators will legislate anything. And I always looked at legislation as to how that legislation would affect me. You know, quadrupling fines for driving through speed zones. I don't know about you, but sometimes when there's construction going on and they've got that 45-mile-an-hour sign up, 45 miles an hour through that construction zone is totally warranted, and you'd like to think that a quadruple fine might be warranted because there's a lot of people standing around working. But most of the time, nobody's standing around working. Most of the time, you can drive through that construction zone at 75 miles an hour and they still have the signs up, and I just don't want to be subject to a quadruple fine. So I vetoed that legislation. And speed limits in general. I mean, you have a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit. Well, at times you can drive 140 in that zone and perfectly safe. But at other times, 55 miles an hour in that same zone is reckless driving because of the circumstances. So that's the libertarian in me. And then stop signs at night. I mean, I do stop for stop signs. I always stop for stop signs, but the light turns red and it's the middle of the night and there's nobody around. Well, maybe I go through that. Maybe I go through it then. But you know, the law can't reflect that. So back to New Mexico and legislators. In the name of safety and health and for the children, legislators will legislate anything and everything. A young guy hurts his head pole vaulting in northern New Mexico. The next thing you know, I have a piece of legislation on my desk, mandatory requirement of helmets for pole vaulters. I pole vaulted in high school. I didn't want to wear a helmet. I mean, so I vetoed that bill. But that's the kind of legislation that happens. And my favorite bill that I vetoed was a Republican bill that, but for my signature, would have become law in New Mexico. It was a dog and cat exercise bill. It was going to require pet stores to exercise their dogs and cats 2 hours a day, 3 times a week. Now, I got to tell you, I think that's a great idea. I mean, really, that's where I want to buy my dogs and cats, is in a pet store that advertises we exercise our dogs and cats 2 hours a day, 3 times a week. But if I would have signed that legislation, the next thing you know, I would have had to have funded the dog and cat exercise police. I just don't think there's an end to that. As governor of New Mexico, I was more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. I really believe in free markets. I believe that if educational entrepreneurs were unleashed on our educational system in this country, that we would see dramatic improvement in the goods and services in education. And I think higher education is just simply a form of school choice. You all are choosing to go to the schools that you're going to. You're paying for that with your own money. And given your circumstance, I'm going to guess that you've decided this is the best decision that you can make. Why can't we apply those same principles to K through 12 in this country? And again, the potential for seeing that happen, I just think is really exciting. So in New Mexico, for 6 straight years, I proposed that every student in New Mexico would get a school voucher that would have brought about that competition. Now, the legislation didn't go anywhere, but I would have discussed this. I would have debated this constantly as governor of New Mexico, believing that that was what we needed to improve education in New Mexico. And then the third thing that I was known for, really nationally, as governor of New Mexico was starting my second term in keeping with a promise that I made to everybody, which is how much money are we spending and what are we getting for the money? And let's put the issues that should be out there, because these are big issues. I wanted to take a really hard look at the war on drugs in this country. And I wanted to include legalization as a potential alternative. Well, I came at this issue from the standpoint that half of what we're spending on law enforcement, half of what we're spending on the courts, and half of what we're spending on the prisons is drug-related. About $70 billion a year. And what are we getting for the $70 billion a year? We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country on drug-related crime. And we now have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. More than Cuba, more than Zimbabwe. I mean, so this is the issue. And I think we have this notion that we're really not arresting people for possessing drugs anymore, that we're really arresting the drug seller, the drug pusher, when in reality, 90% of those arrests are for possession only. So when I came on this issue, this was 1999, I needed to look at Holland and Portugal, which had effectively decriminalized all drug use. And according to the government in 1999, Holland had skyrocketing drug use, they had skyrocketing crime, and it had to do with the fact that they decriminalized drug use. Well, on a very short examination, Holland has 60% the drug use as that of the United States. That's on a per capita basis, but that's marijuana, that's hard drugs, that's kids, and that's adults. Portugal, 10 years ago, decriminalized all drug use, And over the last 10 years, Portugal has shown a statistical drop in heroin use of 50% over the last 10 years. I mean, that's staggering. And then in 1999, of course, and it still exists today, that marijuana is a gateway drug. I've smoked marijuana, and marijuana is not a gateway drug. But that's just me. But I needed to find out in 1999. I mean, what were the statistics? What was the evidence to suggest that marijuana was a gateway drug? Well, there isn't any. And the government itself actually conducted a study that said that it wasn't a gateway drug. Now, if there is a gateway aspect to marijuana, it's that the person that sells marijuana also sells harder drugs, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, LSD, whatever it might be. And the case could be made that kids in a legalized environment where they would have to produce an ID to purchase marijuana wouldn't be subject to harder drugs. I think that that's really a good case to be made. So after looking at this issue for a fairly short amount of time, I came to the conclusion that 90% of the drug problem was prohibition related, not use related. And in 1999, and to this day, I advocate legalizing marijuana. And legalizing marijuana. It's never going to be legal for kids to smoke pot. It's never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, do harm to others. It's never going to be legal to become impaired and get behind the wheel of a car. And when it comes to all other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies, reducing death, disease, crime, corruption, the things that we really care about. Bottom line, looking at the rest of the drug problem as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I said earlier that I have smoked marijuana. I've also drank. I don't drink. I don't smoke marijuana. But I will tell you that from my experience, there's a big difference between marijuana and alcohol. And that big difference is that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. I also maintain that legalizing marijuana would lead to less overall substance abuse, because I think individuals that have alcohol problems today might find marijuana as an alternative with not near the consequence. I think the consequence of smoking too much pot is that you end up going to sleep or you consume too many calories. And then, if I may put a face to the 1.8 million arrests in this country. 2 months ago, I was in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was talking to a young man who had been arrested for possession of 1 gram of marijuana. Now, that's an amount of marijuana that weighs as much as a sheet of paper. So he was arrested for possession of 1 gram of marijuana with intent to distribute it to his 17-year-old daughter. And that sounds funny, and it is kind of funny until you hear what happened to him. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and he had just gotten out of prison having served over 1 year in prison, and he was looking at a long time of parole and probation going forward. That's what our tax dollars are going for. So I got out of office January 1 of 2003. I was term limited. I'm a firm believer in term limits. I think that we're all really well served by politicians that do the right things as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected. I didn't want to have a say in what was happening in national politics. I didn't want to have a say in what was happening in state politics because I had my shot and I really thought that I made the most out of it. But I find myself 18 months ago outraged over the fact that we're bankrupt, that 43 cents out of every dollar that we're spending is borrowed, and I think we're on the verge of an imminent financial collapse in this country unless we right the financial ship, and by righting the financial ship that we would actually have a country going forward. So to do that, we need to slash government spending. How much? Well, 43% if we're just going to balance revenues with expenditures. Very simply, I don't think you should spend money that you don't have. Very simply.